The Vathari Research Collective had a problem. They had sent observer Kale Voss and his junior colleague Tyran into the humans' wilderness 2 days ago. The mission was simple: document the survival behaviors of a single, unequipped human in what Vathari databases classified as a Class 4 Deathworld biome, temperate forest, moderate predator density, unpredictable weather patterns, no tools, no shelter, no fire-starting equipment. They had expected to recover a body by morning. Instead, they were watching Corporal Jiang Shiwan whistle. "He's times whistling," Tyran said, pressing both secondary hands flat against the observation console. His pigmentation had shifted to a pale, alarmed gold. Kyle Voss. He is producing voluntary, melodic vocalizations. "I see that," Kyle Voss said. He did not look away from the feed. On the holographic display, Jiang Siwan moved through the gray pre-dawn forest with the unhurried ease of a creature that belonged there. He was barefoot. He had removed his boots on the first night and tied them around his neck. When Tyran had flagged this as a sign of cognitive deterioration from hypothermia, Kale Voss had quietly reserved judgment. The human's core temperature had not dropped at all. Now Shiwan crouched beside a stream, cupped his hands, and drank. "He's drinking unfiltered surface water," Tyran said, tapping the datapad urgently. "Pathogens, parasites. The runoff contamination index for this watershed is Tyran, 0.73, which by any Vathari standard would constitute Tidin." Kyle Voss set down his own datapad. "He has done this 4 times. His digestion appears unaffected." A silence fell over the observation module. "The human stomach," Kyle Voss continued slowly, "is apparently a more hostile environment than the stream." Tyran stared at him. Then he wrote that down. The first night had nearly broken their instruments. Shiwan had walked for 3 hours after the drop, moving in a broad, looping pattern that initially looked like disorientation. Kale Voss had begun drafting the recovery report. Then the pattern resolved the human had been scouting. He had mapped terrain, water sources, and wind corridors through nothing but walking and observing. And when darkness fell, he had already chosen his location. He built a shelter in 40 minutes, using only his hands and the forest floor. Not a burrow, not a nest. A times structure times angled debris, layered against a fallen trunk, packed with dried leaves, in a pattern that Kale Voss later ran thermal imaging on. The insulation efficiency was, statistically speaking, remarkable. The human had not measured, he had not calculated. He had simply looked at the materials available and times known. "Instinct?" Tyran had asked, bewildered. "Experience," Kale Voss had corrected. These creatures practiced this, voluntarily, for leisure. Tyran had needed a moment to process that. Fire had come next, and that had been the moment Kale Voss stopped thinking of the exercise as documentation and started thinking of it as education. Shiwan had gathered dry bark, dead grass, a thin stick, and a flat piece of wood. He had carved a notch with a sharp stone he selected from the stream bed, taking perhaps 90 seconds to choose the right shape, and then he had made fire. Not with any device, with time's friction, with a stick pressed between his palms, rolled in a notch, heat building through nothing but persistent, rhythmic, human effort. It took 11 minutes. The ember caught. Shiwan lowered his face gently toward it, breathed life into it with careful, controlled exhales, and set it into the tinder bundle he'd already prepared. The bundle flared. He placed it beneath his laid wood without hurry. Then he sat back, looked at the fire for a long moment, and said, quietly, to no one at all, "Still got it." Kale Voss replayed that clip 6 times. By the second day, Shiwan had eaten. This was perhaps the most disturbing segment of the entire observation record. The human had woven times woven, using split green bark, a simple funnel trap, which he set in a stream channel and weighted with rocks. 2 hours later, he had 3 small fish. He cleaned them with the same sharp stone used for the fireboard, cooked them on flat rocks beside the fire, and ate them with every appearance of contentment. Then he made a second trap. "He's times expanding," Tyran said, his voice hushed with something that had stopped being alarm and started being awe. He isn't in survival mode. He's times settling in. Kale Voss said nothing. On the feed, Shiwon was now constructing what could only be described as a chair, a log, stripped of bark, propped at an ergonomically reasonable angle against another log. He tested it, adjusted it, sat down and stretched his legs toward the fire with a sound that the audio sensors logged as a long, satisfied exhale. Kale Voss, Tyrion said. Are we sure this is distressing to him? We are increasingly sure it is not, Kale Voss said. On the morning of the third day, Shiwon found them. This had not been anticipated. The observation module was cloaked. Vithari optical bending technology, rated to defeat any sensor suite below Tier 6 technological development. Humans were Tier 2. There was no logical mechanism by which Corporal Zheng Shiwan should have walked directly to their position, knocked twice on the hull with his knuckle, and said, in a conversational tone, I can hear your life support cycling. You've been watching me since the drop. Inside the module, neither observer moved for a full 4 seconds. Then Kale Voss reached over and opened the external comm channel. Corporal Siwan, he said, choosing formality as a shield. You were not informed of our observation post. No, Shiwan agreed. But it's day 3, I'm fine. And your module's been in the same spot. Animals avoid a 10-meter radius around you. I figured something was parked here. A pause. Also, you smell like recycled atmosphere. No offense. Tiden turned to Kale Voss with an expression of profound helplessness. None taken, Kale Voss said carefully. You are not distressed. A sound came through the comm that the audio sensors flagged as laughter, not the sharp laughter of relief or hysteria, the warm, easy laughter of someone who had been asked if cold water is wet. Distressed? Siwon said. Kale Voss. I grew up in Gangwon province. My grandmother used to make me gather pine mushrooms barefoot. This is a times vacation. They invited him inside. It seemed at that point the only reasonable response. Siwon accepted a ration pack, the Vitari equivalent of trail food, examined it with polite curiosity, ate it without complaint, and then looked around the observation module with a calm, interested expression of someone touring a moderately interesting museum. So, he said, setting down the empty ration pouch, what were you trying to find out? Kale Voss considered lying. He discarded the option. The human had already demonstrated that concealment had limited effectiveness around him. We wanted to understand, Kale Voss said, what happens to a human without technology, without support. Your world is classified as a death world. We expected accelerated deterioration. Siwan nodded slowly. He did not look offended. What did you find instead? Kale Voss looked at his datapad. 3 days of footage. Shelter construction, fire by friction, water procurement, food trapping, tool manufacture from raw materials. A human who had arrived in an alien forest with nothing and had, within 48 hours, made it times habitable. Who had slept soundly each night, rising before dawn without an alarm, reading weather in cloud patterns and wind shifts with the unconscious ease of reading text. A human who had heard a cloaked spacecraft through the ambient noise of a forest. We found, Kale Voss said carefully, that the absence of technology does not disadvantage your species in the manner we expected. He paused. It appears that your species and your death world have reached a long-standing arrangement. Siwan smiled. It was a quiet smile, not triumphant, just warm, the smile of someone hearing something true. We've been camping here for about 200,000 years, he said. We just started bringing gear recently. Tyrion had stopped writing notes. He was simply staring. The gear, Kale Voss said slowly, is supplemental. The gear, Shiwan confirmed, is comfort, not survival. He leaned back in the observer's chair, which he had adjusted without asking, to a more ergonomic angle, and looked at the holographic display still showing the forest outside. His fire, his shelter, his traps, still sitting in the stream. You can study us all you want, he said, but if you really want to understand humans, you have to understand this. We didn't conquer the death world. He gestured at the feed. At the smoke still rising from the careful fire. At the neat, functional little camp a lone human had built from nothing in less than 2 days. We times are times the death world. Outside, dawn light moved through the trees. Somewhere in the canopy, a bird Tyrion could not identify sang a brief, clear phrase into the morning air. Corporal Jung Siwan closed his eyes, listened, and smiled. Kale Voss saved the entire recording under a new category. He labeled it not a survival test, a homecoming.